Have you ever wondered what it takes to make a man willingly run into the jaws of death? What bond could be strong enough to make you risk everything, not for country or cause or glory, but for the man beside you? Can you imagine landing on a beach where every grain of black volcanic sand hides death? Where an entire mountain is honeycombed with tunnels filled with enemy soldiers who've had months to prepare to kill you? Where the naval bombardment that was supposed to destroy the defenses hasn't even scratched the surface? What goes through your mind in those final moments before the ramp drops, when you know that stepping off that landing craft means entering a killing ground designed specifically to slaughter you and everyone you care about? How do you find the will to keep moving forward when men are dying all around you, when your friends are being cut down before they can take 10 steps, when every instinct screams at you to find cover and never move again? I know the answers to these questions because I lived them on February 19, 1945, on an 8-square-mile island of volcanic ash and death called Iwo Jima. I know what it means to land in hell, to watch the worst happen to the best people, and to discover that the only thing that matters, the only thing that keeps you human when humanity seems impossible, is the bond you share with the men fighting beside you. This is the story of the most chaotic, terrifying, transformative day of my life, and the brothers I found in the midst of absolute carnage. My name is Michael Anthony Rossi, and I was a corporal in the 5th Marine Division, 2nd Battalion, 27th Marines. I was 22 years old, from a big Italian family in Brooklyn, the second of 6 children. My father was a stonemason, my mother a homemaker who could stretch a dollar further than anyone I've ever known. I'd enlisted in the Marines right after Pearl Harbor, filled with rage and patriotic fervor and the absolute certainty that this war would be an adventure. By February 1945, I'd been in the Pacific for over 2 years, had fought at Tarawa and Saipan, had seen enough combat to strip away every romantic notion I'd ever had about war. I knew what I was getting into when we loaded onto the transports for the assault on Iwo Jima. I knew it would be bad, worse than anything we'd experienced before. What I didn't know was how bad. Couldn't have imagined it even with all my experience, couldn't have prepared myself for what waited on those black sand beaches. We'd spent weeks training for the assault, practicing amphibious landings, studying maps and photographs of the island, memorizing terrain features and enemy positions. Iwo Jima was tiny, only 8 square miles, shaped like a pork chop, dominated by Mount Suribachi on the southern end. The Japanese had fortified every inch of it, had dug miles of tunnels connecting hundreds of bunkers and pillboxes, had positioned artillery and mortars to cover every possible landing beach. They had 21,000 men on that island, and every single one of them was prepared to die rather than surrender. Our intelligence estimated we'd take the island in 5 days with moderate casualties. They were catastrophically wrong on both counts. My squad consisted of 12 men, most of us veterans who'd served together since Saipan. There was Sergeant Johnny Kowalski, a tough Polish kid from Chicago, who'd been fighting since Guadalcanal and had more combat experience than most officers. Private First Class William Billy Henderson from rural Georgia, only 19 but already a veteran of 2 campaigns, the best shot in the squad. Private Danny Martinez from Los Angeles, a Mexican kid with a wicked sense of humor who could find something to laugh about even in the worst situations. Private First Class James O'Brien from Boston, Irish through and through, who never stopped talking and never stopped moving. Corporal Thomas Tommy Wright from Detroit, a black Marine who'd faced discrimination his whole life, but was tougher and braver than anyone I knew. Private Robert Chen, a Chinese-American from San Francisco whose family had been instrumental in helping us understand Japanese tactics. Private Jack Morrison from Seattle, the youngest at 18, on his first combat operation, terrified, but trying hard not to show it. Private First Class Anthony Delgado from Texas, built like a bull and twice as stubborn. Private Eugene Schmidt from Wisconsin, quiet and serious and utterly reliable. Private David Goldstein from Philadelphia, a Jewish Marine who carried extra motivation to kill Nazis and their allies. And Private First Class Frank Russo, another Italian from Brooklyn, practically my neighbor back home, who I'd known since we were kids. These 11 men were my family. more brothers than my actual brothers in some ways. We'd trained together, fought together, mourned together when we lost friends in previous battles. We knew each other's habits and quirks, knew who would stand firm and who might crack under pressure, knew we could depend on each other when things got bad. That bond, forged in combat and hardship, was the most important thing any of us had. It was what got us through the nights before battle, what gave us the courage to step off landing crafts into enemy fire, what made life worth living even in the midst of death. I loved these men, would have died for any of them without hesitation, and I believe they felt the same way about me. That love, that brotherhood, was about to be tested in ways none of us could have imagined. The night before the landing, February 18th, we were packed into the transport ship USS Hansford like sardines in a can. The sea was rough, and most of the men were seasick, but nobody could sleep anyway. We were all too wired, too aware of what was coming, too focused on survival to rest. Kowalski gathered the squad and went over the plan one more time, though we'd memorized it weeks ago. We'd land on the eastern beaches, Green Beach specifically, at H hour, which was Aero 900. Our objective was to push across the narrow neck of the island to the western coast, cutting off Mount Suribachi from the rest of the Japanese defenders. Simple plan, impossibly difficult execution. We all knew the casualty estimates, knew that 30% of us wouldn't survive the first day. We just didn't know which 30%. We looked at each other in the dim light of the troop compartment, and I wondered which of these faces I'd never see again, which of my brothers wouldn't make it off the beach. Martinez tried to lighten the mood with jokes, but they fell flat. Morrison was clearly terrified, his hands shaking as he checked his rifle for the 100th time. Chen was writing a letter home, probably his last one. O'Brien was praying quietly, his lips moving but no sound coming out. Wright was sharpening his K-bar knife with slow, deliberate strokes. Henderson was cleaning his rifle with the meticulous care he always showed his weapons. Goldstein was reading a small prayer book his grandmother had given him. The tension was unbearable, the waiting worse than any combat we'd experienced. Finally, around 200, Kowalski told us to try to get some rest, that we'd need our strength tomorrow. Nobody really slept, but we lay in our bunks and tried to conserve energy, tried to mentally prepare ourselves for what was coming. The naval bombardment started at 6:40, and the sound was apocalyptic. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers pounded the island with thousands of shells, trying to destroy the Japanese defenses before we went in. The explosions were so loud we could feel them in our chests even inside the ship. We went up on deck to watch, and the island was completely obscured by smoke and fire and explosions. It looked like nothing could survive that bombardment, like the Japanese positions must be completely destroyed. We allowed ourselves a moment of hope, thinking maybe this wouldn't be as bad as we'd feared. We were wrong. The Japanese had built their defenses deep underground, connected by tunnels that protected them from even the heaviest shells. The bombardment looked impressive, but it hadn't significantly damaged their ability to fight. At 08:30, we loaded into the landing crafts. The sea was still rough and the Higgins boats pitched and rolled in the waves. I was packed in with my squad plus another dozen Marines, standing room only, holding our rifles and trying to keep our balance. The boat circled for what felt like forever, waiting for the signal to head toward shore. I stood between Russo and Martinez, 3 Brooklyn and LA boys about to assault a Japanese fortress island. We didn't talk, just held onto the sides of the boat and tried not to vomit from the motion and the fear. Through the gap at the front where the ramp would drop, I could see the island getting closer, could see Mount Suribachi looming over everything, could see smoke still rising from the bombardment. It looked like a vision of hell, black volcanic sand and gray smoke and death waiting on every inch of beach. At 0900 H hour, the first wave hit the beach. We were in the 4th wave, scheduled to land at H plus 15, which meant we had 15 minutes to watch the first waves go in and see what happened to them. What happened was slaughter. The Japanese had held their fire during the naval bombardment, had hidden in their tunnels and bunkers, and when the first Marines hit the beach, they opened up with everything they had. Machine guns, mortars, artillery, all positioned to create interlocking fields of fire that covered every inch of that beach. We watched landing crafts get hit by artillery, watched them explode or sink or burn. We watched Marines reach the beach and immediately come under devastating fire, watched them try to advance through the volcanic sand that swallowed their feet with every step, making movement agonizingly slow. We watched men die by the dozens, by the hundreds, and we knew we were about to join them. Our boat made its run toward the beach at H+15. The coxswain was trying to get us as close to shore as possible, but the beach was steep and the boats kept grounding on the volcanic sand 40 or 50 yards from the actual waterline. Kowalski was at the front, ready to be the first man off, and he turned to look at us one more time. "Remember your training, keep moving, don't bunch up, get off the beach as fast as you can, watch out for each other. Marines, let's go show these bastards what the 5th Division can do." The ramp dropped, and immediately a machine gun opened up, bullets clanging against the metal ramp, hitting the water. Kowalski went first, charging down the ramp into waist-deep water, and we followed one after another, 12 men plunging into the chaos. The noise was indescribable, worse than anything I'd experienced at Tarawa or Saipan. Shells exploding, machine guns firing, men screaming, aircraft overhead, the constant crash of waves against the beach. The smell was overwhelming, cordite and smoke and death and the sulfurous stench of volcanic ash. I hit the water and immediately sank to my waist, the weight of my pack and equipment pulling me down. The water was cold and rough, waves pushing me toward shore while my feet sank into the volcanic sand bottom. Bullets hit the water all around me, and I saw Morrison, 3 men ahead of me, get hit in the chest and go down. He disappeared under the water, weighed down by his gear, and there was nothing anyone could do. He was the first of us to die, 18 years old, hadn't been off the boat for 30 seconds. I forced myself forward, pushing through the water, following the men ahead of me, focused only on reaching the beach. The volcanic sand was worse than anything we'd trained on. Fine black ash that your feet sank into with every step, making it feel like you were running in molasses. I reached the waterline and threw myself down behind a small rise in the sand, gasping for air, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. All around me, Marines were landing, trying to advance, dying. The beach was already covered with bodies, with wounded men calling for corpsmen, with destroyed equipment. Landing crafts were burning in the surf. The Japanese fire was relentless, coming from positions we couldn't see, from bunkers hidden in the volcanic rock, from caves in Mount Suribachi, from artillery positions inland. It was perfectly coordinated, perfectly executed, a killing machine designed to destroy us before we could even establish a beachhead. I looked around for my squad and saw them scattered along the beach, most of them down, taking cover behind anything that offered protection. Kowalski was 20 yards to my right, waving frantically, trying to get us organized. Martinez was beside me, cursing in Spanish, checking his rifle to make sure it still worked after being submerged. Henderson was further up the beach, already firing at targets I couldn't see. Wright was helping a wounded Marine from another unit, dragging him to cover despite the fire. But I couldn't see everyone, couldn't account for all of them in the chaos. Where was Chen? Where was O'Brien? Where was Russo, my friend from Brooklyn who I'd promised his mother I'd look after? An artillery shell landed 30 yards away, and the explosion threw sand and shrapnel everywhere. A piece of hot metal hit my helmet, glancing off but leaving a deep gouge in the steel. 6 inches lower and I'd be dead. I pressed myself flatter against the sand and tried to control my breathing, tried to think through the panic, tried to figure out what to do next. We were supposed to advance across the island, but we couldn't even get off the beach. We were pinned down, taking casualties, unable to move forward or back. The plan was already falling apart, and we'd been on the island for less than 5 minutes. Kowalski appeared beside me, crawling through the sand, his face covered in volcanic ash that made him look like a ghost. "Rossi, we need to move. We stay here, we die here. Gather the squad and we push forward to that terrace." He pointed to a rise in the sand about 50 yards ahead, the first terrace that marked the edge of the beach and the beginning of the island interior. It looked impossibly far away, and the sand between here and there was being churned by machine gun fire and mortar explosions. But Kowalski was right. We couldn't stay where we were. "Where's everyone?" I shouted over the noise. "I don't know. Find who you can and move. We'll link up at the terrace." Then he was gone, crawling away, shouting at other Marines, trying to get people moving. I crawled along the beach, looking for my squad, finding them one by one. Martinez was where I'd left him, and we moved together. We found Henderson still firing methodically at Japanese positions. We found Wright, who'd gotten the wounded Marine to a corpsman. We found Goldstein, Schmidt, and Delgado together behind a wrecked Amtrak. We found O'Brien miraculously unhurt, still talking non-stop even though nobody could hear him over the battle noise. But we couldn't find Chen, Russo, or Morrison, though I knew Morrison was already dead. 8 of us left that I could locate, maybe 4 missing, and I didn't know if they were dead or just separated in the chaos. Kowalski got about 30 Marines organized, from our squad and others, all mixed together in the confusion. On my signal, we assault that terrace. Don't stop, don't slow down, just run, ready, go. He stood up and started running, and we all followed, rising from cover and charging across the volcanic sand toward the terrace. The Japanese fire intensified immediately, machine guns and rifles all targeting us. I ran as hard as I could, my feet sinking into the sand with every step, my lungs burning, my pack bouncing and throwing off my balance. Men fell around me, hit by bullets or shrapnel, going down hard and not getting up. I jumped over bodies, sidestepped craters, kept my eyes on the terrace and kept running. Martinez was beside me, his face set in concentration. Henderson was ahead, moving fast despite his gear. O'Brien was behind, still talking, though I couldn't hear what he was saying. I reached the terrace and threw myself over it, rolling down the other side into a depression that offered some cover from the beach fire. Other Marines piled in around me, gasping for air, checking for wounds, trying to figure out who'd made it. Kowalski was there, already organizing a defensive position. Henderson was there, immediately scanning for targets. Martinez, Wright, O'Brien, Goldstein, Schmidt, Delgado, all there, all alive. But we'd lost men in the run across the beach. Marines I didn't know, cut down before they could reach cover. And I still didn't know what had happened to Chen and Russo. For the next hour, we fought to expand the beachhead, pushing inland yard by bloody yard. The Japanese resistance was fanatical. Every position fought to the death, every bunker having to be taken with flamethrowers or demolition charges. The volcanic terrain was a nightmare. All ridges and ravines and hidden positions. Perfect defensive ground. Our tanks couldn't make it off the beach because the sand was too soft. They just sank to their hulls and became stationary pillboxes. Our artillery couldn't support us yet because they couldn't establish firing positions. We were on our own, small unit tactics, squad and platoon level fighting, the most brutal kind of combat. Around 1100, we were pinned down by a machine gun bunker that was covering a crucial piece of ground we needed to cross. We'd tried to flank it twice, lost men both times, couldn't find a way around. The bunker was concrete, reinforced, with a tiny firing slit that made it almost impossible to hit with rifle fire. We needed a demolition team to get close enough to place charges, but anyone who tried got cut down before they could get within throwing distance. We were stuck, taking casualties, unable to advance, and the whole beachhead was dependent on units like ours pushing forward to make room for the forces still landing. That's when Russo appeared, crawling into our position from the left, covered in blood and ash, his face a mask of determination. "Russo, Jesus Christ, I thought you were dead. Where the hell have you been?" He was breathing hard, clearly exhausted, and when he spoke, his voice was hoarse. "Got separated in the water, landed 200 yards down the beach, been fighting my way back to the squad. I saw Chen, Mike. He's dead. Took a mortar round right after we landed. There was nothing left. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Chen was dead. The quiet Chinese kid from San Francisco who'd helped us so much, who'd been my friend, was gone. I wanted to stop, to mourn, to process the loss, but there was no time. We were still under fire, still fighting, still dying, and I had to keep functioning or join him. Russo saw the bunker that was pinning us down and immediately started assessing it, looking for weaknesses, figuring angles. I can get to it. I can get close enough to throw a charge. Kowalski shook his head. Negative. We've already tried twice. You'll get killed before you're halfway there. But Russo was insistent. Not the way everyone else tried. Look at that ravine on the right. If I use it for cover, stay low, I can get within 10 yards of the bunker before they have a shot at me. 10 yards, I can make that throw. Kowalski looked at the terrain, looked at Russo, considered the odds. You sure about this? Russo nodded. I'm sure. But I need covering fire, everyone shooting at that bunker slit, make them duck their heads. Can you do that? Kowalski looked around at the rest of us. All right. On my signal, everyone pours fire into that bunker. Russo, you wait for them to be suppressed, then you move. Understand? We all nodded, checked our weapons, prepared to give Russo the best chance we could. Kowalski gave the signal, and we all opened up, rifles and bars and submachine guns, all firing at that tiny slit in the bunker. Hundreds of rounds hitting the concrete and hopefully making the Japanese inside take cover. Russo was up and running, using the ravine like he'd described, staying low, moving fast despite his exhaustion. He got within 15 yards, then 10, then 5, and I thought he was going to make it. Then another Japanese position we hadn't seen, another hidden bunker, opened up on him from the side. I saw the bullets hit Russo, saw him stumble, saw him go down. But somehow, impossibly, he got back up, held onto his satchel charge, took 2 more steps, and threw it toward the bunker with everything he had left. The charge sailed through the air and landed right at the bunker entrance, rolled inside, and Russo hit the ground. The explosion was massive, the bunker disappearing in a ball of fire and smoke and debris. When the smoke cleared, the bunker was destroyed, no longer a threat. But Russo was down, not moving, and I knew immediately it was bad. I ran to him, not caring about the fire, not thinking about the danger, just focused on getting to my friend. Martinez was with me, and we reached Russo and pulled him into the cover of the ravine. He'd been hit multiple times, chest and abdomen, and there was blood everywhere. I held his head in my lap while Martinez tried to stop the bleeding, but we both knew it was hopeless. Russo looked up at me and there was pain in his eyes, but also something else. Satisfaction, maybe, or peace. Did I get it, Mike? Did I get the bunker? I was crying, tears cutting tracks through the ash on my face. You got it, Frank, you got it, you saved us all. He managed a weak smile. Good. That's good. Tell my ma. Tell her I was brave. Tell her I did my duty. His voice was getting weaker, and I could see the light fading from his eyes. I'll tell her, Frank, I promise you were the bravest man I ever knew. He squeezed my hand once, tried to say something else but couldn't get the words out. Then he was gone, and I was holding the body of my friend from Brooklyn, the kid I'd grown up with, who I'd promised to bring home safe. I don't know how long I sat there holding Russo. Probably only seconds, though it felt like hours. Martinez pulled me up, told me we had to keep moving, that we'd honor Russo by surviving and finishing the mission. I nodded, unable to speak, and forced myself to stand, to pick up my rifle, to keep functioning, but something had broken inside me. Some barrier between the soldier who follows orders and does his duty, and the human being who feels and mourns and loves. I was functioning on pure rage now, wanting to hurt the enemy who'd killed my friends, wanting to make them pay for Chen and Russo and Morrison and all the others who died on this terrible island. We pushed forward through the afternoon, taking more ground, linking up with other units, slowly expanding the beachhead. The casualties were staggering, worse than anyone had predicted. Everywhere you looked, there were dead and wounded Marines, corpsmen working frantically to save lives, burial details collecting bodies. The beach behind us was a scene of absolute carnage, destroyed equipment, burning vehicles, bodies in the surf and in the sand. But we held, we didn't break, we kept pushing forward, because that's what Marines do. We fight, and we die, and we keep fighting until the mission is complete or we're all dead. By nightfall of that first day, we'd advanced maybe 600 yards inland. Nowhere near our objectives, but we held a beachhead. We had men and equipment ashore, and we hadn't been pushed back into the sea. The cost had been terrible. My squad of 12 men was down to 7. Morrison, Chen, and Russo were dead. 2 others were wounded and evacuated. 7 of us left, plus replacements that would arrive tomorrow. Green kids who'd never seen combat, who we'd have to train and protect, and hopefully keep alive. The bond we'd built over months of combat had been shattered in a single day, and we'd have to rebuild it with new faces, new names, new brothers. That night we dug in and prepared for the inevitable Japanese counterattack. They came at us around 0200, infiltrators trying to penetrate our lines to kill Marines in their foxholes to create chaos and fear. We fought them off at close range, brutal hand-to-hand fighting in the darkness, the kind of combat that gives you nightmares forever. Henderson killed 3 Japanese soldiers with his K-bar knife, never making a sound, moving like a ghost through our positions. Wright strangled an infiltrator who'd gotten into our line, his powerful hands ending the threat before the Japanese soldier could raise an alarm. O'Brien, still talking, gave away positions of infiltrators he spotted, his constant chatter actually useful for once. We survived the night, held our positions, and when dawn came on February 20th, we were exhausted but alive and still in the fight. The battle for Iwo Jima lasted 36 days, the longest and bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history. We fought for every yard of that island, cleared every cave and bunker and tunnel, killed nearly all 21,000 Japanese defenders. The 5th Marine Division suffered over 6,000 casualties, including nearly 900 killed. My squad cycled through 28 different men during those 36 days, as casualties were replaced by new arrivals who were in turn killed or wounded, and replaced by more new men. Of the original 12 who landed on February 19th, only 5 of us survived unwounded to the end of the battle. Me, Kowalski, Henderson, Martinez, and O'Brien. Wright was killed on March 1st, shot by a sniper while scouting a position. Goldstein died on March 8th when a cave we were clearing collapsed on top of him. Schmidt and Delgado were both wounded badly enough to be evacuated, Schmidt losing a leg to a landmine, Delgado taking shrapnel in the face that cost him an eye. The bonds we'd built, the brotherhood that had sustained us, was torn apart by that terrible island, and what remained was a shell, a memory of what we'd been. But in the midst of all that death and destruction, new bonds formed. The replacements who survived long enough became part of our family, earned their place through shared combat and shared sacrifice. We learned their names, learned their stories, learned to trust them and depend on them. The bond wasn't the same as what we'd had with the original squad. Couldn't be because we were all too damaged, too traumatized, too aware of how quickly you could lose someone. But it was real, and it mattered, and it kept us functional when functionality seemed impossible. We fought for each other, protected each other, mourned each other when the island took more of us. That's what combat does. It strips away everything except what matters most, and what matters most is the person fighting beside you. On March 26, 1945, Iwo Jima was declared secure. We'd won, if you can call it winning when the cost is so high. Over 6,000 Americans killed, nearly 20,000 wounded, to take an 8-square-mile island that most people had never heard of. But that island became a critical base for our bomber campaign against Japan, allowed damaged B-29s to make emergency landings, saved countless American lives. The strategic value was real, even if the human cost was almost unbearable. We'd done what we were asked to do, had taken the island, had accomplished the mission. But we'd left pieces of ourselves on that black sand, had lost friends and brothers, had experienced trauma that would mark us forever. I came home in late 1945 after the war ended, returned to Brooklyn a different person than the kid who'd left in 1942. I'd seen too much, lost too much, been changed in ways I'm still discovering 79 years later. I visited Russo's mother, Mrs. Russo, who lived 3 blocks from my family's house. I kept my promise, told her that Frank had been brave, that he'd saved his squad, that he'd died a hero. She cried and held me and thanked me for bringing her son home. Though I'd only brought his story, his body was buried in the cemetery on Iwo Jima, along with thousands of other Marines. I visited Chen's family in San Francisco, told them about their son's courage and sacrifice. I wrote letters to Morrison's parents, to the families of all the men we'd lost, trying to give them some comfort, some understanding of what their sons had died for. I stayed in touch with the survivors. Kowalski, Henderson, Martinez, O'Brien, and I became a lifelong brotherhood, bound together by what we'd experienced on Iwo Jima. We wrote letters, visited each other, gathered for reunions every year. We were the only ones who really understood what we'd been through, who could talk about it without having to explain. who carried the same memories and the same scars. When Kowalski died in 1998, we buried him with full military honors, and I wept like I'd wept on that beach in 1945. When Henderson passed in 2003 and Martinez in 2010, each death was like losing another piece of myself, another connection to that terrible island and the bonds we'd forged there. O'Brien and I are the only ones left now. He lives in Florida, I'm still in Brooklyn, and we talk on the phone every week. Two old men remembering young men who died 80 years ago. We talk about the squad, about the men we served with, about that chaotic day on the beach when everything fell apart, and we discovered what we were really made of. We talk about the bonds that formed in combat, bonds stronger than family or friendship or anything else in civilian life, bonds forged by shared trauma and mutual dependence and love, expressed through protecting each other in the midst of hell. Those bonds defined us then and define us still, are the most important relationships we've ever had, more meaningful than marriages or careers or any other accomplishment. That's what I want people to understand about Iwo Jima, about combat, about war. It's not about strategy or tactics or heroism in the abstract. It's about the men beside you, the brothers you fight with and die with and survive with. It's about bonds forged in the worst circumstances imaginable, bonds that sustain you when everything else fails. Chen, Russo, and Morrison died on that beach, along with thousands of others, but they live on in my memory, in my heart, in the stories I tell. They were my brothers, and I loved them, and I carry them with me every day. That's the real legacy of Iwo Jima, not the famous photograph of the flag raising on Suribachi, not the strategic victory, not the statistics and casualty figures. The legacy is the bonds between Marines who fought together, who depended on each other absolutely, who discovered that love is the strongest force in the universe, stronger even than the chaos and death and terror of that terrible island. If this story touched your heart, if it helped you understand the bonds forged in combat and the chaos of battle, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to hear more stories from World War II veterans. Share your thoughts in the comments below. These stories matter because they preserve the memory of men who died too young, who gave everything for their country and their brothers. They matter because they show what human beings are capable of, the best and worst of us, the love and sacrifice that emerge even in the midst of absolute chaos. Thank you for listening to this old Marine's memories. Semper Fi to my brothers who didn't come home. You are not forgotten.